Well, of course, as we are working through the early part of March, meeting season is winding down, but still going on in many parts of the country ahead of spring planting, which is not too far away in the distant future, especially considering this week with some of the temperatures that we are seeing across parts of the Midwest to start the week. Let's get some perspective on what we're watching in these markets and maybe what he's hearing from some of the meetings that he's been attending here throughout the winter months. Chad Hart, professor with Iowa State University, joins us here on Market Talk today. Chad, it's good to catch up with you, and I appreciate you taking a few minutes from your mobile studio here today to join us. As I alluded to, meeting season still going, kind of winding down, but really the last couple of weeks, I know things have been in full swing for you and many of your ISU extension colleagues, haven't they, Chad?
Oh yeah, well I was gonna say we've been on the road, and this will go on for about another week to 2 weeks. But you can also tell that farmers are itching to get out in the field. I got to admit, as I drove up here to Northwest Iowa today, I saw a heck of a lot of tractors moving, a few sprayers. You can tell folks are getting machinery out and about, cleaned up, and getting ready to roll.
Well, I'd love to hear perspective. What have you heard from farmers at some of these winter meetings? I know you guys travel the entire state to have different workshops and meetings in many different counties. And what is the consensus from farmers among, thinking about tariffs, the ag economy, commodity prices as a whole? I mean, what is the mood that you're hearing from Iowa farmers, Chad?
Well, I'd say the mood's sort of cautious right now. I mean, the tariff talk definitely concerns them. They've been seeing some gains, especially as we look at, with the WASDE numbers coming out soon. We've been watching those export numbers, and that's been strengthening over the past few months, and so that's led to a little bit of consternation, I'd say, out here in farm country. But they're also just looking forward to planting, so you can tell. Been in a lot of seed meetings the past couple of weeks. Definitely, the mood has been talking about a lot more corn being planted this year than last. Um, some concern on the soybean side, basically saying, how long will it take for the soybean market to sort of recover and catch up to where corn is today?
And that's a good point, and I've heard a lot of the same, that talk of we might see more corn acres, and really, Chad, that corn bean price ratio, even though we had this recent pullback and then the markets tried to come back and correct a little bit here after some of the tariff news was digested, but that corn bean ratio still really is leaning to the corn side, isn't it, Chad?
It definitely is. I mean, I think when you're looking at whether you're looking at the price ratio or if you're figuring out profit margins on a per bushel basis or per acre basis, it's been leaning to corn for a while. It's definitely going to pull some land that way. And, when USDA did the ag outlook for them, they basically said, hey, beans is going to lose about 3 million acres, corn's going to gain that 3 million. And it lines us back up to where we were in 2023 as well. So you could argue it sort of fits from a rotational perspective as well.
What are your thoughts a little more broadly on the tariff conversation? Does that change if this continues to ebb and flow for the next several months? We know that April 2nd is now this big, shiny new date. Um, if something drastic happens here, does that change any of the acre conversation, or is it a moot point at this point? Because I think a lot of producers have made their decisions already.
That's the deal. I think a lot of it's already baked in. So you can't really shift based upon the tariffs, nor should we be trying to right now. As you said, the tariff situation is fairly fluid. They're on again, they're off again. And luckily, right now, even if they do come on over the springtime, we really don't worry about major impacts until we get to the fall when we start to ramp those export sales back up again.
Very true. Well, and thinking about the whole picture, export sales, I mean, China, they're pretty much done buying US quart of beans at this point, right? Seasonally, we're out of that window, right, Chad?
Yep, seasonally, we just transitioned out. And so that's why the timing here doesn't hurt as much as it usually does. Is that, you're right. The idea is we tend to dominate from our harvest until South America really begins harvesting, and that's going on now. And so we've seen the world market shift towards South American production. And so while we'll still make some sales, these aren't the big sales we worry about. It'll be next fall that we're really concentrating on.
Well, and I have to wonder here as well, just looking forward, especially as we set the crop insurance price now too. I think that's all kind of added this extra layer of decision making is happened or is happening as we speak. And so from a risk management standpoint here, moving forward into spring planting on the grain side, is there anything you would remind producers as we navigate all this volatility, Chad?
Well, you mentioned crop insurance and the idea of that when we look at those insurance prices that we'll have, corn again holds an advantage over something like soybeans. We're taking a bigger step back in terms of that insurance price due to just the lower prices we've seen in general this winter as opposed to last winter. So, here in Iowa, I know that corn price came in at about the same level it did last year, whereas beans we're missing almost $1 off of what we had were able to cover last year. So that's also going to lean folks towards corn. So when you look at where the market is, sort of where government policy is or crop insurance is, it's all been directing us towards corn. So it makes sense that that's where the acreage is going to go.
How about over in the protein sector? Let's talk cattle and hogs. I know tariff impacts and concerns have been weighing in there. Fundamentally, it looks like we're trying to find some support in futures. We obviously still have high prices, especially for beef at retail. There's a lot of factors going on here across the board. What's your take on the protein sector right now, Chad?
Well, as you mentioned, the idea is we still see some strong prices, mainly because consumer demand remains robust, not only here in the U.S., but as we look globally. I mean, the thing I've been sort of surprised about as you look at especially beef and pork exports so far this year, they're holding up pretty well despite the tariff talk. And so that bodes well for us as it says that international customer is riding on these higher prices almost as well as U.S. consumers have been.
And I wonder too, especially on the cattle side, we talked about, maybe there's some talk we could start to rebuild this herd later this year, but we just know that until that really happens, fundamentals are probably going to stay pretty tight in the cattle complex, Chad.
They definitely will, and I think you're right. The idea is we're definitely looking at latter half of this year into early next year before we really start to turn around. Given the strength of that U.S. consumer out there, those heifers right now are still worth more as steaks than they are as mama cows right now, and that's what's driving the market.
Anything else you're watching, grains, livestock, macro picture, the broader economy? Any final thoughts you would have for folks just as we're kind of working into the middle of the month of March here? Spring planting again is on our doorstep, etc. What should folks be paying attention to, Chad?
Well, in this case, I'm going to watch for at the end of the month, we'll get, the acreage intentions report. So we'll finally get a snapshot based upon farmer data on what we think we're going to plant this year. The other thing I'm going to be watching for here is actually um, some of the government support. If you think about it, here in March is when we're expecting to see those financial and disaster aid packages that were passed back at the end of last year. With that money coming out, that'll help ease some of the financial burden on our farms right now and hopefully set them in a better spot as they go into planting this year.
Good thoughts, and we'll definitely be watching as those numbers are released from USDA at the end of the month, and we'll have to catch up once we get those numbers and get a better sense of how that's going to impact the markets. For now, though, we'll let you go. Chad Hart, professor at Iowa State University. Safe travels back home, Chad. Thanks for joining us on the show today. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jesse.